could help shield your wealth from the economic storms ahead. You may even qualify for up to 10% back in bonus silver. Visit 17metals.com to claim your free information. Get educated, get empowered, and reclaim your financial sovereignty today.
So the transition, that's a perfect way to go into it, Rick. We were talking about this pre-show and the subject of PTSD. And I know it's something that you, not only being a military officer, but having lived through this fifth generation war that we're in, I've spoken about it openly. I absolutely would not hide for a second the fact that I struggle with PTSD, and it's from all of this over the last few years. I don't think there's too many people, that's why Q tells you those who know don't sleep. I mean, that's literally one of the key symptoms of PTSD. And so we all understand it. Whether or not all of us want to admit it or not is a different subject, but I think it's a widespread thing. And like we were saying, we've had the benefit of watching this for, depending on how long you've been in this game, for some people before the Q operation, and if you've been watching since, it's 7 years or 4 years or whatever. And I think you can kind of start to see it happening now, Rick, where we're in that confusion stage where, I made mention of some of my friends and family members that have come around where I think they finally hit their breaking point, and that everything is so crazy, they're actually coming to us with questions. And that's going to intensify. I mean, you can already see, if you spend any time in the media or on X the last few days, just with all this chaos that's already broken out since the first, that's starting to advance. So the subject of PTSD and how to handle it is going to come to the forefront one way or another. And we know what it's like when you the metaphor we use is when you wake up a sleepwalker, right? The last thing you want to do is wake up a sleepwalker suddenly out in the middle of the woods or something because they freak out. But at some point or another, that's where we're headed. So I know you have some info on this you want to present, if you want to.
Okay, post-traumatic stress. Now, first point I'm going to make is I'm not going to call it post-traumatic stress disorder. And that was after reading somebody's book who's actually suffered from it. But let me just go through this. What we're about to go through with the reveal is going to be a reveal of such magnitude that it will cause stress. Now, those who have been following A1 in the last few, I guess, couple of months, or maybe longer, is I've been progressively informing people to the best of my ability of the psychological impact of what we're going to go through. And the reason for that is quite simple. But let me explain why a political party would bother. Why am I talking about post-traumatic stress? Because your view of the world and your view of yourself are about to be challenged, almost to breaking point, if you're not careful. And you must be prepared for what's coming. Now, as a political organization, a political movement, it is a people organization, a people movement. We need to make sure that we've got the right people. We're recruiting tough, smart people who are ready to do what's got to be done. So let's quickly review the paths to post-traumatic stress, and then we'll come to some conclusions. Now, why? Well, let's go back to our intention. This is the beauty of military planning. If you clarify your intention at the beginning, then you very quickly know what's got to be done the moment it pops up, and you very quickly can discard other jobs that appear to be sexy, interesting, fun, but if it doesn't contribute to victory, then you just don't do it. So let's just quickly review our intention. Purpose: to save Australia. Very straightforward. The method we'll leave for a moment. Let's go straight to the end state. We are creating a moral, sovereign, self-reliant Christian Western constitutional republic, which is economically powerful, militarily intimidating, politically free, culturally vibrant, and socially cohesive. This is not a to-do. This is not a marketing statement. This is a to-do list. So anytime we get a challenge, if it contributes to this, it's in. If it deviates from this to the least degree, it's out. Now, as to the method, and this is why we're focusing so much on the psychology of what we're going through. Because your psychology is your value sets used to make decisions. And the better informed and the better balanced your value sets are, the better informed you are, the better decisions you're going to make. It's survival. That's why sound psychological people survive better than those who are unstable, let's say. But what was our method? And we came up with this years ago. To create a moral political movement that empowers every Australian to reach their highest individual potential so that collectively all can participate in the reformation of Australia. So we're about empowering the people to do the job. This is not the Rick Bosi show. I'd love to go back to my old life, thank you very much, traveling the world, consulting, making $1 million a minute and having a great life, instead of checking my FPOS card to see whether I've got enough money to buy groceries this week. It's a hell of a shift, let me tell you. Happy to do it though, don't get me wrong, not having a whinge, it's necessary. But it's about empowering the current crop of people so they can empower their children and grandchildren to create an undefeatable nation that will always look after itself. So let's have a look at stress. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you're going to see the 5 phases that this covers: biopsychosocial functioning under normal conditions, traumatizing events, the activation of the threat system, the mechanism of traumatic injury, and the biopsychosocial functioning after traumatic injury has occurred. Now, before you think this is all my clever work, it's not. Can you see, am I on the screen sufficiently for you to see that book, Dave?
There you go. Now you are. Now it's full screen.
Okay, so there you go. That's the magazine I got it from. It's called Trauma-Related Stress in Australia, Essays by Leading Australian Thinkers and Researchers. Editors are Bob Douglas and Joe Wodak. Now, what I'm about to show you is a diagram from this book, and this is why reading is so important, ladies and gentlemen. If you're not reading new stuff every day, you're going to be left behind. The brain is like, your body. Use it or lose it. But here's the 3 gentlemen that contributed to the work that you're about to see: Dominic Hilbrink, David Burl, and Zachary Steele. That's them. So you got the right guys. The credit to these people. I'm just parroting what they wrote. And this is also the basis of an interview I had with an individual who suffered from this and made her way out. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so there you are, your biopsychosocial self. You're subject to normal sort of stresses, and you've got the fight, flight, and freeze response. You've got memory processes where you remember things. Memories fade, which is not a bad thing, because you can imagine remembering everything like it happened yesterday, it would overwhelm you. So losing memory is actually part of a healthy process. You've got your stress response training, how to handle stress, those that handle stress well and those that don't. And then you've got a view of yourself and the world. So you're just bubbling along under normal conditions. Now, have you seen an arrow come up with the words threat, fear, terror pathway? Dave?
Yep, we got it.
Great. Terrific. Okay, let's now examine this. This is the threat, fear, terror pathway for post-traumatic stress. Generally relates to soldiers, police, first responders like ambulance and firefighters. Now, they face a threat to their physical integrity. There's a physical threat, abuse, harm, or death. Makes sense. There is an element of the inability to control, eliminate, or respond to that threat because of the environmental conditions in which they operate, whether it's a battlefield, a siege hostage situation for the police, let's say, or an ambulance medic who is dealing with the result of a motor vehicle accident. Now, when this happens over time, it starts to cause real damage. So we're not talking about just the one time, it's just repeated exposure causes problems. That leads to a terror response. Now, there should be a second box there now. Dave, you got that?
Yep, we're good.
Great. Here's the terror response. A sense of helplessness. And guys don't like that, generally speaking. Some women don't. Some women aren't fussed. But we need to be in control because that's what we are biologically programmed to do, to protect, to stand up while others sit down, to run into the danger while others run away. But there's a helplessness. That's coupled with an intense fear and vulnerability. And then potentially leading to a complete loss of control where I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do. This is a bad place to be. And then under extreme activation, you've got that fight, flight, and freeze response. And just let me just focus on that for a bit for the soldiers. There's an excellent book called Hero or Coward. I read it back in the 80s when I was a young captain. And it was found that a lot of the soldiers in combat didn't actually squeeze the trigger. They'd take a sight picture, but not actually squeeze the trigger. They just froze. But for others, the pressure became too much. And they flew. They took flight. Now, some of them ran backwards and they were charged for desertion, and those that ran forward won medals. Now, I'm not saying there weren't brave men that knew exactly what they were doing and ran forward, but this is an interesting effect of terror on an individual. Now, over time, if you look up there, it says accumulation and the overwhelm. The individual is overwhelmed over time. It accumulates and it overwhelms. And this leads to a traumatic injury. Now, when I say traumatic injury, I'm not talking psychological, I'm talking physiological injury. There is a real physiological injury. The brain scan of a sufferer from post-traumatic stress, the brain is visibly different, even to the untrained eye, to one that has not undergone traumatic event. And so this is the first lesson. There is a physiological injury that takes place in the brain. It's not a case of suck it up, mate, that was 20 years ago. You can't say that, because in their minds, the brain has frozen. The threat is ongoing. It is like it happened. It's happening now. You can't just switch that off by saying get rid of it. The brain is damaged and it's an ongoing threat. The brain is locked on that. And we've heard stories and potentially experienced that moment where you hear you've come back from, say, the GAN or somewhere, and you hear a car backfire, and the veteran dives under a table, takes up a fire position, and is ready to start fighting. That's because in that individual's brain, it has locked onto it. It's real. It's still happening right now. Now, the cabal knows this. That's why they use this to control people. So the threat terror system is now hyperactive. They start reliving traumatic events, only because it never stopped. The threat appraisal triggered by reminders of and uncertainty. Whenever they find themselves in a similar situation, it defaults to that ongoing threat in their mind. There's a persistent sense of danger and hypervigilance. It's not unusual for soldiers particularly, or police, to sit with their back to a window at a restaurant, for example. They've got to have their back to the wall. I remember I had to steel myself to have my back to the window. And then when I got into politics, I went back to putting my back to the wall.
Yeah, you know, another
that's
a big one, and another common one that you see very often is because I know some people that have also gone through this is they often insist on having their own mode of transportation no matter where they go. So they because they need to be able to be in a situation where they can get out if they need to. They don't like having somebody else drive or not having their car or their own hotel room or things like that. Absolutely.
Yep. That's absolutely correct. They need control because they have a sense they have no control, and if they don't, then they're in more danger. Sensitivity to environmental noise that interferes with the need to maintain vigilance. So when they believe they're in danger, loud televisions, people laughing and carrying on, they are highly sensitive and insulted by that. And intolerance for ignorance of threat, high sensitivity to rule violations. Again, for those of you who have relatives who have suffered PTSD in this sense, you'll recognize that intolerance of ignorance of threat. Can't you see that's dangerous? And the people look around and go, no. Yeah. No, you've got to do it this way because otherwise we'll die. High sensitivity to rule violations. Remember, they are still back where they were, and yelling at them or telling them to suck it up is not going to bring it back. So this is the threat, fear, terror pathway. Now, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you've got the horror, shock, injustice, guilt pathway. Now, this is what people suffer when it's not in that first category I mentioned about soldiers, first responders, police. This bottom pathway, and please understand, it is identical, could be as a result of workplace bullying. And when I say workplace bullying, I'm not saying a boss that reprimanded you for turning up late 4 days in a row. That's on you. I'm talking about malignant narcissists that love to destroy people. They've been called, one individual called them non-contact serial killers because they derive tremendous joy in destroying people. And it comes through, whether it's workplace bullying or any situation where you are abused. And there's that repeated exposure, inability to control, although the threat is not physical. So let's go through that. This is a threat to moral integrity. and they suffer to moral pollution, grotesque scenes, devastation, and there's a personal connection in there. Moral pollution, moral betrayal, injustice, abandonment, blame. These are all feelings. There's no physical action taking place here. Moral compromise, actual or inaction that violates a personal moral code. And when I started going through this, I realized that, wow, maybe I've got a few issues here. Because as I said at the beginning, the idea of killing a baby at the point of birth and people being completely inured to any emotional response, I find that despicable. And after sort of talking about this for many, many, many years, they're still doing it. I tell you, I get pretty animated pretty quickly that such a fundamental moral tenet should be so easily abandoned or betrayed. So
you know, Rick,
the event occurred.
Rick, just real quick, I want to highlight, because I think everyone's very well following along. Now I see why you wanted to do this way. I mean, if you see the two pathways that are laid out there, and now you go to that bottom one, and just look at that first thing, right? The threat to moral integrity, everything you just laid out, injustice, all these. Does that start to sound like what everybody in the truth movement is looking at every single day? And now do you see how this all connects? I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's important, because that's exactly where this is what I want people to understand, that we are all suffering this and we're doing it. Anyway, let's go. And you've nailed it, mate. That's exactly the point. Then we experience the shock horror response, the shock and grief. It's genuine shock and grief. I mean, how can you? And you know, we pace up and down and we swear at the computer screen, and the feeling of disempowerment. How many times do I have to say this to people before they get it? And the answer is an infinite number. That's followed by outrage and disgust. How can they call themselves human? And you feel psychologically violated, because we're talking about those deepest held values. Remember I said that psychology is your deep values as the basis for decision making on how you live your life, what's right and wrong. And those with a strong sense of right and wrong are the ones that are most psychologically violated. If you go to the other end of the spectrum, where you have the malignant narcissist, where they have no sense of right and wrong, they can glide past anything. It's an assault on deeply held beliefs, assumptions, and expectations. Now, again, let's just focus on this for a bit from the truth perspective. Although, understand, this is workplace bullying, whatever it is, but it's not like we are defaulting to rules given to us as children in kindergarten. No, this is a result of many of us in the truther movement. We are well read, we are experienced, we have a lived experience of this stuff. We have seen the consequences of a different set, different value sets as a national standard. And I certainly have, having lived and worked in third world shitholes around the world. I can tell you, you might not like your country, but at least it's a Christian-based one. And that means that we at least have this underlying assumption that we are equal, as opposed to Hinduism, which is supremacist, Judaism, which is supremacist, Islam, which is supremacist, and even the Buddhists out there. Afghanistan was Buddhist until the Muslims turned up. So good luck with that, folks. So you understand now this assault on our deeply held beliefs, and again, a lived experience. This is not theory. This is where the left wing lives. The progressives, it's all theory to them. But when you've lived it and you know it to be true and you've studied it, and as I did when I was in Afghanistan, I actually read Pashtun fables to understand the psychology. And wow, it is just such variance with ours, that they are brainwashed from an early age from their fables to take a bow to the strong man and do whatever they say and just be grateful you're alive and he hasn't killed you for no good reason. Yep. So these deeply held beliefs, as I said, this is not resorting to childhood, defaulting to some kindergarten view of life. We're all mature, experienced, well-read, thoughtful individuals that know that the path that we have been on for so long is only going to end badly for everybody. And so we are motivated to fight against that. We feel it. Now, this personal connection again and the moral injury leads to, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, the same traumatic injury. And let me just say this, because people who have gone through this, whether it's through a bad marriage, workplace bullying, or whatever, we believe you. You are right. And people who've been telling you to suck it up just don't know what the hell they're talking about. You have every right to feel the way you feel. We believe you. Now, let's continue. So that traumatic injury goes on. Now, once again, this ongoing symbolic threat, this symbolic threat continues. It is ongoing. That's why sometimes you'll have an argument and you'll bring up something from 20 years ago and you're told to let it go, but then no, this is still real in my head. It might not apply to the circumstances that we're living in, but it is still real for whatever reason. You never got the apology you deserved. And ladies and gentlemen, here's a sidebar comment. Don't wait for the apology. It ain't coming. You never got the apology. You never got the acknowledgement that somebody did you wrong. They lied about it. They pretended. They ran away. They made it your fault. They gaslit you. All these things that go on in personal relationships, they all accumulate to make it an ongoing symbolic threat. So the moral symbolic threat system is now hyperactive. You feel tainted, contaminated, isolated. You feel shame, guilt. You're in the shame guilt cycle. You begin replaying events, trying to change the outcome. And I'm not sure if anybody, this rings a bell with you, but it rings a bell with me. What if I'd handled it differently? What if I'd spoken up when I didn't speak up? Maybe if I didn't speak up, I did speak up. And it just plays over, and you are desperately trying to find a way to say, how could I? And this is okay, because it's that self-reflective capacity to review your performance in order to do better next time and avoid the problem. But it becomes a trap. And sometimes, no, just sometimes there is no better way to do it. Sometimes what happened because it happened, and that's it.
Yep.
And anyway, let's keep going. This should be ringing bells all around the planet right now. An unresolved sense of injustice sensitivity. And I've got a big issue here, because as a boy at school, I hated bullies. I was bullied, and I learned to take care of myself. But today, as a man, for many years as a man, in fact, most of my life as a man, whenever I see injustice or I see a bully, I just step in. I mean, I used to do that at school. I was the kid that stood between two bigger schoolmates and hold them apart. That was me. I had this sense, this highly developed sense of justice and injustice. But if there was a bully attacking somebody that was weaker, I went from zero to hero in a microsecond, and they'd be up against the wall. Now, this is from the good Catholic boy that, turned the other cheek most of the time, but I realized, what, enough's enough. I'm tired of this shit. And that drives me with Australia One as well. And then you've got alienation, loss of purpose, chronic detachment, loss of trust and faith in the world. And now you're lost. You're lost. So you can see those two parallel paths to post-traumatic stress. One is the threat, fear, terror pathway. One is the horror, shock, injustice, and guilt pathway. Both pathways involve a threat to one's personal integrity. One is physical, the other is moral. And this, at this moment, when I was preparing these slides, and I added a few bits to it, I think of Jesus Christ. Think of the moral injury being done to him, the most innocent of us all, being punished in the most cruel way. So when I say, do I really have to put up with this shit? I can hear Christ whispering in my ear, I did. That just brings me back to earth. So physical threat, moral threat. There you go, folks. They're the two pathways. It is real. There are ways out, and there's plenty of information out there to guide you. This isn't a matter of just pointing out what happened to you. At least you know, A, you are right. B, we believe you. 3, it's a system. It's a system that the cabal has used forever to destroy us, to control us. And once you've seen the map, you can at least start to figure out a way out.
I just want to point out to people that are watching to, go back. I was putting that full screen so people could screen cap that, because Rick, I got to say, I knew we were going to discuss this tonight, and I'll be the first one to say I can relate to every last thing on that bottom path personally.
Yep.
It's gotten better for me over the recent months. I have no problem admitting to people I struggle with almost every last thing. That is exactly the pathway that I've been on for a number of years and been working on. And I think that that's absolutely brilliant the way you put this together, because I think that one of the reasons people that perhaps in our situation are can be hesitant to talk about PTSD, especially with somebody, let's say, who is in the military, because there's this thing like, well, who am I to talk about me having PTSD from learning all these truths about the world? You know, you were shot at, or you had your arm blown off, or any of these other horrific things. But that absolutely just brilliantly lays it out. I haven't seen a better presentation of those two paths of PTSD personally, and I've done a lot of reading and studying on it. So I just want to compliment you on that, because it's just very, very well laid out, and that just perfectly explains the difference. And like I said, that bottom pathway, I see so many people in the chat, their minds are kind of exploding in a good way right now, saying, wow, that is me. That's what I'm dealing with. Wow. Because, you know, we're just trained our lives. Well, PTSD, that's when somebody gets shot at or whatever. Nope. And that also would explain why a lot of people, and that's why we tell some people to stay away from the mainstream media, because there's a lot of people in our movement that say, look, I know this is a show, or I know that justice is being done, or I know that's not Joe Biden, but I still scream at the television. Well, that's why. It's a trauma response.
And just on that, again, men are competitive, and they'll say, "Oh, as you quite rightly said, I shouldn't feel like I'm suffering as bad as somebody that has had worse." I'll read you a story on that in a minute, but just understand this: the individual that I interviewed, the female, she went off to a clinic for a bit, and the other members in this group were all vets, military, and police, and she felt ashamed because she was subject to a malignant narcissist that almost completely destroyed her in every sense, physically, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and spiritually. And they said to her, "Don't be silly, love. It's like getting cancer, whether you get cancer of the breast or cancer in the nuts. We've both got cancer." And they accepted her absolutely equally. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is no hierarchy of I deserve more attention than you. If you're suffering post-traumatic stress, that is fine. You are all equal. And the people that are suffering it, they don't bother putting any hierarchy on it. So we believe you, we trust you, and we're going to see if we can get people through. Now, view of self and view of the world. Now, there's a lot of things that have got to be done. And in fact, I read just this morning, apparently there is a drug, which is a natural treatment that comes out of a tree in Africa. And instead of taking years of high-priced synthetic drugs from Big Pharma, a couple of days helps heal the injury and helps people on their way. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I found it fascinating that I should spot that article this morning as I was going through my feed. I thought that was a gift from God. Okay, so now I want to talk about this view of the world and view of self. You should see a book cover up there, Just War by Tom Newman. Have you got that?
Yep, I got it.
Great. Okay. Tom Newman is American. He sent me a couple of books of his just before Christmas, and a very polite note saying he appreciated my work. And I read the Just War book. I flew through it. Now, as you look at the picture on the screen there, that's an M16 he's carrying. Now, M16's it's not a big weapon, and yet it dwarfs Tom. Tom, by that picture, to my mind, is a physically small man, but he has the heart, mind, and soul of an absolute Lion of Judah. He is one tough dude. And let me just tell you about Tom Newman just for a bit, and then we'll get to his conclusions about post-traumatic stress. He was a paratrooper in the 101st Airborne Division in Vietnam in '68. It was the bloodiest year of the war. He was involved in 76 helicopter insertions and 54 into hot LZs. His unit, the 1st of the 502nd, suffered 97% casualties and fatalities. In his book, Just War, he wrote, "A major component of post-traumatic stress is moral dissonance." Now, just pause on that for a second, folks. The physical threats that he went through, and he managed to survive, and yet he said the major component is moral dissonance. It's what we see of the world, how we assess things. He said the event can completely destroy our belief system, the ideas we held that made sense of the world. He goes on to say that at any point in time, we are the summation of what we know and the experiences we have gone through. Events and information change how we see the world and, in effect, change who we are. A traumatic event can be so life-changing that we are, in effect, a different person, a new you. And you must understand that. You are not the same person you were yesterday, last week, last month, last year. You are a new you. And in order to recover from PTSD, it is imperative that we reconstruct a new belief system that encompasses our new reality and the new you. I'm going to repeat that last sentence because this is going to this is going to be something you have to tattoo on your forehead and remind yourself every day in the coming days, weeks, months, and years. In order to recover from PTSD, it is imperative we reconstruct a new belief system that encompasses our new reality and the new you. Now, we've been told countless times that once the truth is revealed, we'll all be shocked. We fortunate few that are ahead of the game will know what that means. We have billions of people out there that have no clue what's coming. And I feel for them. Now, back on the post-traumatic stress white slide there, Dave?
Yep.
Good. Okay. Moral wounds. Moral wounds have been intentionally imposed upon us. Suicide is not the answer. You might get there. I've been there. It is not the answer. Alex Szabo, he was a friend of mine when I was in first grade at school. And one day Alex didn't turn up. And we found out later that his father had grabbed Alex, his older sister, and his younger brother. He'd gone up to a cliff in Sydney Harbour, pushed the daughter over the edge, and then with his two other children in his arms, he jumped off the cliff and they all died. Suicide is not the answer. I cannot imagine what drove him to such a desperate act, what was going on at home with his wife. Corporal Ted Howard. Ted was one of my corporals when I was a platoon commander back in the early 80s in Townsville, Queensland, Australia. Ted was a good man, good soldier, straight as an arrow, knew his job, reliable. He's the sort of man you wanted to clone. When he first marched into the platoon, I said, okay, what do you prefer me to call you, Ted or Edward? He said, call me Corporal, sir. That was Ted. He's just such a straight shooter. What a great bloke. Anyway, he got his girlfriend pregnant, and Ted, being Ted, was going to do the right thing, marry the girl and give the boy or the child a father. She said she wanted nothing to do with him and she cut him out of her life. Now, I don't know whether she ever had the child or not. Ted couldn't handle it. So he went out scrub and shot himself in the head. Ladies and gentlemen, suicide is not the answer. A friend of mine, Maria Given. Maria found out that her husband had a child had been having an affair for some time, had a child by another woman. And her life was now over because she had her family. She was an older woman. And she was looking forward to the autumn years of her life. And then all of a sudden this occurred. She couldn't handle it. Similarly, she jumped off a cliff at Coogee in Sydney. Suicide is not the answer. Whatever moral wounds you are feeling, no matter how impossible the future seems, it's not the answer. Don't let the bastards win. Don't give them the satisfaction.
That's treason. That's treason. They say, holy shit, they caught us. They caught us.
What storm, Mr. President?
You'll find out. And they know